Welcome back to the Glint Standard. Today we're talking about business finance for success. So today we have with us Guy Church, a wealth advisor, and part of what he brings to the table is really thinking about not just individually, how do you manage your wealth to achieve the goals you want to, but how do you do that with a business as well? And so we'll touch a lot of different points today. We're going to go over maybe credit worthiness a little bit about loans, equity versus growth, profitability versus growth, and talking through some different landscapes as maybe you're starting a business, maybe you're in the middle of a business and trying to figure out what do I do next. There's a point to having somebody who can manage your wealth.
Correct.
So, fair to say that that's
I think
important?
That's fair, yes. I mainly work with individuals, but
Yep.
many of my individuals are either business owners or they're executives in companies. So trying to help them understand and answer questions they have as they go along is key.
Yeah.
Specifically, if it's a business that's owned by a client, we need to lay those same principles that we do individually over their business and make sure that we're addressing those same concerns.
Yeah, and it's, as you get to know the individuals you work with, and maybe they have businesses, maybe they don't, really getting to know them means you need to understand about all those little nuances. Maybe not the deep details. Maybe that can be a little bit scary. But you do get to explore really and probably discover a lot of really cool things that maybe you didn't know before. It's what we love about our industry as well.
Right. And that's, dealing with individuals that are employed by a large company. It's nice. You've got a set handbook. You're not having to make decisions on big corporate decisions, but we've got a playbook. We've got hey, here's how you're going to retire. Here's what benefits you have today for protection planning. We know what our salary is.
Yep.
When you cross over to the business, you don't necessarily have that handbook yet. And so it's creating, have you thought about these things? What are the things that we don't know yet?
So starting out in the basics of basics, even starting out when you're young, right? Mm-hmm. Credit cards, credit worthiness.
Yeah.
You touch on that a little bit, the importance of it?
Yeah, I mean, as a financial guy with financial degree, we talk about leverage and Finance 101, you should borrow money and leverage that. And as you get into the real world, almost all of us make the error of swiping the card too much or over levering ourselves. And so the appropriate amount of leverage, the appropriate amount of credit worthiness is something that you really have to strive for.
Okay.
We don't want to be all cash and do everything and not build credit, but we also don't want to be highly levered to where we don't have the cash flow to seek new opportunities.
Does the basic principle change based on the net worth of an individual, or is it kind of pretty much a set standard of how you should think about it?
I think it does accelerate. I think it is larger as you have a higher net worth or as the business is more mature and has more cash flow, more reserves built up. When you're early in a business, it's, how are we going to get this roof over our head? We may have to lever something.
Right.
But as we go deeper into it, we may have more flexibility. So the longer we have, more mature the business, we probably have more opportunities to use it as a tool versus as a necessity.
Right.
Early on, it might be a necessity. I mean, you can buy or you can't buy, but later you can choose to do it out of cash flow, out of reserves, and such. So,
yeah, it's funny. Here's my basic premise on.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're gonna love this or not on credit worthiness and why it's important. As I've gotten older, I'm buying the same things, and I feel like for less money. Because I have better credit, I'm getting better interest rates,
Correct.
Or better maybe just perks overall. I think you're right, though. You still can't go crazy with that stuff.
Correct.
But, okay, if I have the same stuff as everybody else and I'm paying less for it, I feel like it was worth it.
Right.
That struggle in the beginning.
Absolutely.
Right?
And in the beginning, we don't have many options. So you have to use what you have available to you. But, having the long game in mind is what's key. Knowing that we're not going to be here 5 years from now. We're going to be in a different spot. And may not be physically in a different spot, but maturity, financial maturity, we should be in a different spot. And so while we're choosing this today, we may have different options down the road. And so the higher the credit score, banks like that. So if you have a personal banker, now all of a sudden, instead of having to have an asset to secure a loan, they may have a line of credit for you because you've done great business with us.
Very powerful.
Very powerful.
Yeah.
And it's nice
Yeah.
to know that as a business owner, that I have the flexibility to do that remodel out of my own checking or cash, or, hey, the bank will give me this at a really good rate and I can pay it back over 3-5 years, something.
Yeah.
So I think the flexibility is what's key there. But it does. It grows with the maturity of the business.
Right. So that leads us into like loans, grants, equity financing. When you talked about a line of credit. How do you go about navigating what's going to be best for you? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? I know that ties more into the business side of it for the most part, like grants with nonprofits.
Right.
Really important. Those are clients we
Right.
work with. We know the power of those grants. Very
Right.
specific what you have to deliver against grants. You're competing for grants,
Right.
where if you can self-sustain by donations or generating your own income that doesn't have any controls of how you spend, you have more freedom as a business.
Correct.
So grants are very unique in that regard, but the other lines of credit or equity financing, whatever that is, what are your thoughts on the best approach for those types of things?
Let me take you back to individuals first,
Okay.
because that's what I know more of.
Yep.
What we always look at is what are all the options. And so
Okay.
a client might come with the opportunity to get a loan from a credit union at a reasonable rate. They might have a 401k that they have borrowing privileges against. They can borrow up to $50,000 or 50% of the value of a 401k and pay themselves back, if you will. They may have their own cash reserve. And so it really is just making sure that you're aware of what are all the tools we have available, and then what are those restrictions. If I take a loan against my 401k, what are the rules? Oh, I can't pay it back unless I pay it back in full. I have to pay it out over 5 years. So if I have an influx of cash, I can't just go pay off that loan unless I have all of it. I can't add extra to the
Right.
principal. So it's the same thing. You get a grant, there's rules, there's restrictions, there's handcuffs. If you get a line of credit, and there may be no restrictions, but there may be a higher interest rate.
Right.
And so it really is just mapping them out and looking at what each of those mean. As an early business, you may only have one or two choices, and as a more mature business, you might have multiple different lines that you have available to you. So it really is evaluating what are all the options. People talk about options as being stressful. Well, there's a lot of stress. I have to decide which one's best for me.
Right.
Well, the reality in the individual world, if you only have Social Security to retire on, it's not stressful. It's the only place income's coming from.
Right.
But you're broke.
Right.
So it may not be good to not have those options. So I'd rather you have options and then navigate working through them, but you have to be aware and willing to talk through all those things versus just taking the first thing because, oh, it's easy.
Yeah, I think, as you're talking through there, pops in my head right now too is there's a lot to it, right? And I feel like it's important to talk about my perception of a wealth manager and what they bring to the table. It's advisory. It's here what our options are. Here's some guidance.
Yeah.
But you're not making decisions for people. They're still making their own decisions
Absolutely.
based on goals that you put in place together that the individual has said or the business has said, this is what I want to achieve, what I want to do. Okay, great. I hear what you're saying. I don't know if this is going to align with your goals. It's going to shift your goals a little. And that's really what a wealth manager does. It's not, and I think there's a perception sometimes it's, hey, here's my stuff. Go do what you're supposed to do with it and make me rich.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. It's a true
Right.
partnership.
It is.
And I
It's
think
collaborative.
it's important for that distinction to come out on those types of things. And you're dealing with the wealth of people.
Right. Well, and I think that's where a collaborative relationship versus a true leadership or it's not a dictatorship. These are advisors that I've put in place. So for a business, it might be your accountant, it might be your attorney, and it might be your financial advisor.
Really like a group.
A group,
Yeah.
a consortium of people that says, hey, that's not really in alignment with where you're wanting to go. And, we've worked together. You helped us rebrand. That's what you did. You presented us with paths. After a lot of research, you gathered
Right.
a lot of data from us to the point where it made us all think differently. Or we had paths that we could go down that we hadn't thought through before. So doing the same thing. The problem with small business owners or young businesses is sometimes they don't have those relationships yet. And so it's how do you develop those relationships with a
Okay.
great banker, a great CPA, a great attorney? Who are you going to trust?
How do you feel like you start establishing it before you start then? Because that sounds like that'd be the place to do it, but are you worth their time,
Exactly.
right? So how do you manage that?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I think of personally trying to be aware that I need to have those. I can't hit the easy button sometimes on the banking relationship. I want a banker. So I can't just go online and get the app and get the easiest thing. I need to find a banker that can become my banker. And it may be a younger banker that's also starting off their
That's a
banking
good point.
career.
Mhm.
And that now I've got a banker that can be an advisor for me. And they'll want to build those relationships. Almost every business owner's going to want and need some type of accounting service or CPA. So, maybe it's not get the cheapest one, it's get the one that's most appropriate for your business and your business needs, both now and do they have the capacity for where you want to go in the future. And so I think it's just being aware and really focus on that early. And we've talked about this before. It's a lot of business owners are entrepreneurs. They may have been tacticians before and just were really good at it, and now they've been thrust into a position where they have their own company, but doesn't mean that they went to school to be
Right.
a company owner or a business owner or a leader. So developing those skills and just being aware that, hey, my full-time job is this, but I need to be really working on these other areas to develop those relationships where I have this group of people that can help me.
So we're kind of transitioning easily, actually, from starting out to kind of here we are. We've got things in place, and now we're getting a little more mature. Right, we're hitting those teenage years, maybe
Right.
young 20 years. We
Yeah.
gotta be careful in those years.
Right.
Talking about we're profitable, maybe.
Yeah.
Right? Is that enough? What about expansion and growth? How do you feel like that ties together?
I would take growth and profitability as kind of a risk and reward type of conversation. And individuals, we would talk about what are the exposures we have to risk around our house could burn down, our car needs the proper coverage, life insurance, disability coverage, things like that. In business, you have protections you need as well. But also, with every risk, you have the opportunity to either transfer that risk or avoid that risk is even something you can do. When you get to profitability and growth, oftentimes I see people focus so much on profit and margins
Yep.
that they don't give themselves the opportunity to really grow. And so if you get so wrapped up in, oh, well, I've got the leanest pay structure, I got the leanest comp structure, are you giving yourself the ability to expand and grow? Because if you're wanting to have long-term growth, there's going to be some risk that you're going to need to take to get somewhere that you haven't already been. And so what does that risk look like? Does it look like taking on a loan? I hate debt. It's part of my DNA.
I don't either.
I hate debt. But at some point, we may have to make that decision that we're going to take on some debt knowing that it will open up another line of business, or it's going to allow us to develop something that we wouldn't develop on our own with our own group. And so it really becomes more of a risk reward, and then you have to really evaluate what is that risk to the rest of the business unit if I choose to do that.
Yeah. And it's really no different when you started out, right? As an individual or with a business, I'm choosing to either, I'll say, struggle tightly financially, knowing and I trust that I'm going to get there and I'm going to do some other things. I've got to figure it out on my own. And with the business, it's kind of the same way where, okay, I'm going to start out. Am I going to go get a big loan before I've started, or I'm going to just feel my way through and make those connections and then change those connections later or build upon those connections? There's a lot of strategy behind it as well.
Right.
And part of that is trusting yourself.
Right.
And I think risk is something everybody should have. Most people are afraid of it.
Sure.
But I do think it has to be evaluated risk like you talked about.
Correct.
That makes all the difference in the world, I would think.
Yeah, measured risk. And then the thing that I think that I have struggled with, and I've heard a lot of business owners struggle with, is when no longer it's just me and my wife. Now I'm responsible for 7 other families. I have 7 employees that 6 of them are the key people that bring income to their home. And so now I'm not just making a decision for Glint or Momentous, I'm making a decision for our whole team. And so it becomes a burden that if we don't recognize it, we're making decisions based on it, but we need to recognize it because it really is something that, okay, it's real. It's a real concern now because now people are relying on this business. Your clients are relying on the business staying healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. And trust plays into that a lot, and that's where that comes in. And you got to earn that, I think. People aren't just going to give that to you, especially this day and age.
Correct.
But making those right decisions early on as you start to move forward starts to develop that trust, and then you have more faith in it as well.
Exactly.
And it's actually, for me, it's very freeing to know no matter what decision I make, and I do evaluate my decision making, but when it impacts the individuals, employees, the business, whatever that is, you go, okay, here's the impact. I've got it, and I know I can manage this, and I think it's worth it.
Right.
And I have a group around me that I can throw it in front of.
Right.
And they go, okay, have you thought about it? I said, ooh, I did not think about that.
Right.
And then you're taking your steps back. So I think that true partnership piece of it is pretty huge.
Exactly. So risk is one thing, understanding the consequences, and then having that expectation set, and then also reviewed by others that are important to you, I think is key.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. I think we put a lot of information out real fast. Obviously, if you need more details, reach out to us. Agency@theglintstandard.com. We'll respond to you. If we don't have the answers, we definitely know people who do, and we can start building some relationships for you as well in regard, especially with business, finance, advertising, marketing. We know those things as well. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Please give us a thumbs up below if you like this episode, and feel free to leave us any questions or comments you may have. To check out our past episodes, do so here. Subscribe to our channel below.